there, welcome back to The Truth is Somewhere, a conspiracy theory podcast where we talk about exactly that, conspiracy theories. And maybe sometimes other things in that area. Megan, today what are we talking about?
Today we're going to reel it in from last week's utter silliness, led by our friend Corey.
Hey, I talked about something very, very serious.
Well, we're going to talk about something very, very, very serious today.
Ooh, extra
then.
very in there.
We're getting real serious and a little bit dark today.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about vaccines.
Oh, nice.
Yep.
Vaccines are serious.
We're going to talk about vaccines.
Yeah?
And the conspiracy theories that surround them.
Okay.
So without further ado, let's jump in. In 1998, British gastroenterologist Andrew Wakefield and his colleagues published a study in The Lancet, which is a medical journal, suggesting they had found a cause to autism spectrum disorder.
Okay.
Wakefield and his colleagues examined the digestive tracts of just 12 children with behavioral disorders. 12.
Only 12?
Only 12.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. It's important to note that. Only 12.
That's how many are normally in a recognized study.
Right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. 12 children. Mm-hmm. 9 of whom were autistic. So, other behavioral disorders as well as 9 autistic children.
Okay.
In those children, researchers found intestinal inflammation, which they blamed on the Measles Mumps and Rubella, or MMR, vaccine.
Okay.
Wakefield suggested that the inflamed intestines let toxins into the bloodstream, which traveled to the brain, effectively poisoning the brain.
Okay.
2/3 of the parents involved, so parents of 8 of the kids.
Mm-hmm.
8. Cited the fact that their children had gotten the MMR vaccine within 14 days of the noted changes in behavior.
Okay.
Those parents believe that the MMR vaccine was responsible not only for the inflammatory bowel disease that each of the children had, but also for what Wakefield defined as regressive autism. So basically the parents said that they were like happy, normal children, and then they lost a lot of their basic skills and their language skills.
Interesting. Within
14 days of getting this vaccine.
Okay.
So, remember, he's a gastroenterologist, so his whole thing is looking at the stomach, like the intestines.
Yeah, not the brain.
But he happened to find this inflammation. And then
good for him.
The inflammation was also linked to the time when they when their behavioral developmental disabilities made themselves known, essentially.
Okay.
So he and 12 other people published this paper in The Lancet.
If I remember correctly, because autism is not something I know a lot of information about, but it is something that doesn't, unless it's severe, it's not something that normally shows itself until about the time the child becomes a toddler, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you have like a normal happy toddler and then suddenly like things start to go funky. Like
Okay.
they develop normally up until that toddler point and then things start to go sideways.
Okay.
And it's like, it's a huge spectrum. It's not just like one defined thing. So, which is why he defined it as regressive autism. So Wakefield announced his findings at a press conference and kicked off more than a decade's worth of debate and hysteria. Something I found really interesting, and like I already kind of make a note of it, but his paper was only 5 pages long. Like this published study was only 5 pages long.
Short and concise.
And he only had 12 people, and so it's just insane to me that like such a very small research paper with such a very small sample size could have kicked off this type of hysteria. Like, this level of hysteria. Because we're still talking about this 20 years later.
Yeah, we are. We're talking about how ridiculous.
Yes, you and I are talking about
vaccinate your children.
Yes. You and I are talking about how ridiculous this is. And, like, science-minded people are talking about how ridiculous this is. But there is a large contingency of the population that is, like, terrified of vaccines.
Yeah. You know, we might
lose some listeners.
Truthfully,
I know this.
Truthfully, I don't care. I don't care. Yeah, I would love to have as many listeners as possible. But if this right here upsets you because you believe that you shouldn't vaccinate your children, then you don't care. You only care, one, about your one child and your one belief with no science backing it. And you don't care about the other children that you are affecting, the other people you are affecting. Like,
yes.
Absolutely, it is disgusting and entirely selfish.
Yes. You have hijacked a lot of the points that I'm going to make later.
Sorry.
I picked a topic about which we are both passionate, obviously.
Yeah.
But it was a topic that I felt like we should cover, because we do not steer away from controversial.
Let's do it. Keep going. We'll touch harder on the things that I very lightly touched on.
Yes. So that was 1998.
Okay.
So then in 2002, Wakefield and colleagues published a second study, which I actually didn't know he had done a second study.
Okay.
Like, when I had heard about this before, and you were like, oh, this has all been debunked, like, I only knew about the first study. I didn't know he had done two. And the second one was much more damning.
Oh, yeah.
The second study was involving 91 children that had autism and 70 children without. And Wakefield and his colleagues studied intestinal biopsy samples from all of the participants and found that 75 of the 91 children with autism had measles in their intestinal biopsy tissue. And only 5 of the 70 patients without autism had the same trace of the virus. Which, that is super, super fascinating, for sure. And there's a little bit in that where that makes me go, like, so what's the link between measles and autism? Like, that's crazy, right?
Sure.
And the problem was, and I'm just going to touch on this a little bit because this has all been debunked and I don't want to get too far into the weeds on that part of it.
Okay.
But there's very good scientific arguments about the fact that in this study, they left out, like, the times at which these children had been vaccinated.
Okay.
So, like, we don't know if the children with autism had been vaccinated, like, 3 days ago. And the children without had been vaccinated, like, 2 years ago.
Sure.
Which could explain why you would find parts of a live virus.
That's true.
In the guts of somebody who had just recently had it done versus somebody who didn't. So we don't know when the children were all vaccinated.
That makes sense.
Which is, like, a huge thing to leave out.
Absolutely.
Because if you're looking to say there's a causal link, wouldn't you keep track of when those children had been vaccinated?
You think that would help? Absolutely.
Yeah. If you're looking for a causal link, specifically, you would want to know when those children had been vaccinated.
Yeah, I don't know. I think definitely after doing one research paper, one closed experiment, you get the okay, or you do it yourself, you do a bigger one, I think I would ask every question I possibly could.
Yeah, exactly.
Even if I found that I was wrong, at least I asked every question I could and found it from every direction I possibly could. I mean, if his sample size is definitely better. It's not the thousands that usually get put into something like that, but it's much better than it was before. It's hard to make a claim with numbers that are that small, but it's definitely something that leads towards it.
Right.
Something more viable, I should say. But otherwise, I don't know what the link is between what he found, but you're absolutely right. He left out a big piece of information.
You can't find a causal link because he didn't give us the pertinent information.
Not enough information
to say there was a causal link. So, almost immediately following Wakefield's revelations, people took up the war mantle against vaccination. We know this. We've seen it. In the United States, at the same time, fears emerged regarding the use of, I'm so sorry, medical terminology is not my strong suit, thimerosal, which is a mercury-based preservative. And the preservative had been introduced in the 1930s to prevent bacterial contamination in vaccines.
Makes sense. Mercury is really bad for a lot of things.
Yeah, it's half of that preservative's weight is mercury.
Okay.
And we know that mercury in large doses is extremely toxic. Yeah. But they were like, it was such small doses that, like, when they looked into it, when there was research done, there was absolutely no proof of any causal link between this mercury and autism. Because in the United States, so in the UK, you have this guy claiming that it's coming from the MMR vaccine.
Sure.
In the United States, you have people claiming it's coming from the mercury that is used in the preservative in the vaccine.
Sure.
Causing autism. That's what you have people on both sides of the pond saying.
Yeah. So I would question if there was more mercury in that vaccine than what a person who had fish in a regular diet ate
Well, that was the thing. It was like it was around that time when they started investigating more about like mercury being in fish and how much we can reasonably ingest before things start to be. So it was already a big scare, and then it just became a bigger scare. Essentially, is what happened. There were lawsuits flying everywhere. But bottom line was nobody found any causal links.
Makes sense.
And the CDC, because even though they found no proof of harm, they went ahead and said as a precautionary measure that you're going to take that preservative out of vaccines that are given to children 6 and under.
Sure, that makes
just
sense.
as a precautionary measure.
Why not?
They have tiny
better
bodies.
Safe than sorry.
Better safe than sorry.
Yeah.
There were certain flu vaccines that were given exemption for it, but otherwise, like all the big vaccines that children get don't have that in it.
Probably all the ones that could live without it.
Yeah. And then you get like celebrities are starting to get involved. So environmental lawyer Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Took up the mantle against vaccinations and the United States public health establishment in 2005. And he's published numerous articles in popular culture publications such as Rolling Stone, Salon, and even Huffington Post, which is like definitely credited towards this becoming a much bigger hysteria than it could have been.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, when you start publishing things in Rolling Stone and Huffington Post, where a lot of people are reading and a lot of people are seeing, and it's being shared through social media, that's when you start to get, like, the buildup of people believing this. And I didn't write this down, but I looked at a lot of Pew Research statistics on people who believe that vaccines are not safe. And it was really interesting because I guess it's really not that interesting or really not surprising at all, but they found that people who were highly educated tended to hold with science. Weird. And I know, weird, right? And believe that vaccines were safe. And so it was the people who were like of a lower education that believed that vaccines weren't safe and were choosing not to vaccinate their kids. And then in Romania, it has caught like... This is crazy. So Europe's having it much worse than the United States is. The United States still actually, like, largely believes in vaccines.
That's good.
Europe, it's a catastrophe for Europe. In Romania, it's a very poor country. So what you have is you have low socioeconomic classes who are not highly educated being essentially afraid of the system, like afraid of the man.
Sure.
And being told that their children need to have this thing and thinking that it's not safe for their children, so they've been choosing, like, en masse to not vaccinate their children. And they have such a bad measles outbreak going since 2016 in Europe that it's killing thousands.
Sure.
And, like, which is crazy because we don't really hear about that.
No, and I mean, it's
not a U.S. thing, so
it's not a U.S. thing.
We don't hear it.
Well, I mean, we're getting cases of it now. I just saw an article talking about, I don't know, I think we've got no more than 20. Probably.
Yeah, it's very, very low because we still have a high rate of vaccination, but it's going down.
But what's really sad about that is some of those people were people that are allergic to the...
Yeah, or you have infants who aren't old enough to get it yet, or you have children who have, like, childhood cancer, and can't get vaccines while they're undergoing treatment. And
this was a disease we thought we almost eradicated.
It had pretty much all but been eradicated, yeah. In 2017, there was actually an outbreak that started at Disneyland.
Interesting.
Because there was a child who wasn't vaccinated when they should have been. So, anyway, moving on. That was all stuff that I hadn't even written down, but we just started talking about it. So he was joined by multiple coalitions, the guy that wrote in Salon and Huffington Post and Rolling Stone. And celebrity influencers that had become convinced that the government was poisoning their children and causing an autism epidemic and lying about it. Oh, so here's our conspiracy, right? There's our conspiracy.
There it is.
So actress Jenny McCarthy blamed MMR for her son's autism, and in 2008 said, quote, "In 1983, the shot schedule was 10. That's when autism was 1 in 10,000. Now there's 36, and autism is 1 in 150. And she's basically like, it's gotta be this vaccination thing. But, like, experts don't really know if there's actually an autism epidemic. Like, they basically say it's hard to tell right now if autism itself is actually on the rise, or it's just because we've started paying more attention and we expanded the spectrum to include other things.
Absolutely.
And in the 1990s, there was this big push in special education to pay attention to autistic kids. So it might just look like we have more cases, but it's really just because we've gotten better at diagnosing those cases.
I mean, I think you're absolutely right. On the darker side of things, now that we have made it easier for people to report things like rape, incidents have been on the rise.
Right.
And has it actually gone up, or is it that
just because
people are actually reporting it now because they're not as afraid to do it?
Yeah.
Right? So it looks horrible. Like, if you look at the numbers between, you know, I'm sure 1990 and 2018. In 2018, the number is way larger than it was in 1990. But is it really on?
Is it actually
larger? I mean, population increase.
Yeah.
Considered in that, is it actually any larger than it was before?
Yeah. Well, and basically, it's just that when you have experts on autism spectrum disorder who are working in this field, and even they are like, we can't really tell you yet if these are higher incidences. Like, we have to wait because we've just paid more attention.
Right.
So, yeah, it's, like, really pretty to think so. Like, that's such an easy explanation to be like, oh, it's the vaccines, I found it, I found the thing, it's the big bad boogeyman, here it is, I found it.
Sure.
But that, like, the answer just isn't that simple. And I'll hop in here, because I also didn't write this down, because this wasn't the focus, but I know people will ask, we don't know what causes autism. We know it is not vaccines. Vaccines do not cause autism. That has been debunked. End of story. It is known that it is probably a genetic factor.
Chromosomal. I thought it was pretty certain that it was chromosomal.
Well, so here's the thing. They think that there may be environmental factors, and they think there is definitely genetic factors. But they don't have, like, a steadfast, this is what causes it.
Sure, okay.
Because there's no way to, like, definitively be like, this is what causes it, so don't do that. But there's definitely a genetic factor, and they know that because when you have twins, if one has autism, if one embryo has autism, you are 60% likely to have the other embryo have autism as well. So there's a genetic link, absolutely.
Yeah.
So they know there's a genetic link, they think there's an environmental factor, but they don't know.
Okay.
Research is still ongoing. They do know it's not vaccine stuff.
But they know how to... Can't they normally test it before?
They can test when it's still in utero.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I don't know if they can test for autism. They can test for Down syndrome.
Okay, which is
still in utero.
Isn't that a form of autism technically?
I'm
not sure.
Not well educated on that.
I thought that was the severe end of it, but I'm not sure.
I am not well educated on that. I'm
not sure. I thought Down syndrome was the severe end of it, with, like, Asperger's on the other end.
You may be right.
I'm not positive.
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So while all the hysteria is building and the public conversation was happening with increased vitriol on both sides, like, I am sure some of you have been on social media where you have seen somebody that maybe an acquaintance of yours, if you're on the science side and you think that vaccinations are safe and that anti-vaxxers are putting hordes of people in danger, you have seen an acquaintance of yours post something anti-vax. I know I have. Which is shocking, because I wouldn't think that I would have any friends that would do that, but I have.
I'm sure I have.
And it makes me irrationally angry. And I know for the people who are anti-vax, because they wholeheartedly believe that this is going to damage their child. I get it. You wholeheartedly believe that this will somehow damage your child, you're going to get very passionate about it on that side. If I wholeheartedly believe, as I do, that it doesn't damage your child and you choosing not to vaccinate damages other people's children, like innocent children, then I'm going to get passionate and angry about it, right?
So, it's real interesting, because I think you said, what, the autism rate now is 1 in 150?
Well, she said this, I think, in, like, 2008.
I don't know where that number came from. I have never heard anything that damning.
I don't know.
I've never heard anything.
I honestly didn't look into the numbers of it. I didn't, because that wasn't what I was focused on.
And truthfully, 1 in 150?
That's a lot.
Seems really unlikely to me. If you said 100, I mean,
1 in 1,000. Look it up right now? Look it up.
I mean,
why not?
Let's look it up. Let's see what it says. We'll go there and here. Type in the old Google. 1.7%, which is no way.
That's not 1 in 150.
No way 1 in 100. And that was in 2014. So.
Well, actually, that is like a 1 in 150.
Oh. No, it is. Actually, it is. No, I am way wrong. You're right. Yeah. 1.7%. But again, I guess we'll have to read more about it.
Well, remember, it's a really wide spectrum, too, though.
Yeah. Okay. Anyways.
Anyway.
Right.
So it really is a 1 in 150.
I guess
we learn
so.
something new every day.
1 in 152 among girls. 1 in 38 among boys, it says.
Oh,
Wow.
Wow.
Anyways,
Boys
we're
have it rough.
look, we're spouting out numbers. I'm not
This is
reading
from
this.
the
I'm just
CDC.
looking at numbers. It is from the that's what
It's from the
they're
CDC.
quoting from the CDC.
Yeah.
It does sound pretty damning.
Yeah.
But again, I think with the spectrum, it's probably not as bad as we make it.
Right.
As it's being made out to be. And truthfully, my thought process is even with numbers like that, if vaccines are what are causing it, and you have some people with autism, a range of it, is that still not better than people dying in the masses of horrible,
we had previously eradicated?
horrible diseases
Yeah.
that we had previously
Yeah.
thought were eradicated. The worst part about it is the longer that these diseases live, the more likely they are to become resistant.
Right.
So, yeah, it might suck and you might want your child to survive. And I absolutely get it. And I will tell you right now, I am not a father. I'm not. And I don't have that connection. So maybe you're going to think I'm talking out of my ass. And maybe I am. And maybe I'll change my mind when I have a child. But I still think for the betterment of mankind, you take that risk. Because if you don't take that risk, someone else won't take that risk. And your child might die anyways because someone else didn't get some shot that your kid then got sick from because that kid sneezed on your kid and now your kids have polio, which is eradicated.
Yeah. So this goes back to the point I was making about people being very passionate on both sides of this argument. So while everybody's arguing, the scientific community has, like, very quietly been debunking this. Like, they were very quietly finding mountains of evidence against what Wakefield had asserted.
At least that's what the government wants you to think.
Actually, it's what a British journalist wants me to think.
Oh.
So, Brian Deere, a British journalist, began investigating the claims of Wakefield, as so many others did during the media frenzy. Deere's investigative journalism on this case led him to 2 British press nominations. Because instead of more sob stories from parents who claim that their toddlers fundamentally changed after the MMR shot, Deere found an intricate web of lies. Lies. Not
okay.
lives.
Lies. I was
Spiders.
like, did you
web
say...
Of lies.
Okay, web of lies. I was like, web of wives?
So 2 years before the study of the 12 children, Wakefield was hired by lawyer Richard Barr to conduct clinical and scientific research in hopes of filing a class action lawsuit against drug companies that manufactured the MMR vaccine.
Oh. Why?
In hopes of making lots of money.
Okay.
That's why you file class action lawsuits as an attorney.
Okay.
So Wakefield set off looking for a boogeyman because he was paid to find a boogeyman, and lo and behold, he found the fucking boogeyman. Like, what a fucking surprise,
the
right?
Fake boogeyman, yes.
To the tune of roughly $750,000 US.
Ooh, that's how much he made?
Yeah, that's how much he made.
Wow. Actually, kind of...
study of 12 people.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. That's kind of small money. Not what I was expecting. I was expecting millions, but $750,000 is nothing.
In 1998?
Still nothing to laugh. Yeah, people were... Yeah, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was playing then.
Well, sure, but still, like...
If it wasn't, it was only a few years later.
Yeah. So if that alone wasn't enough to make you doubt the boogeyman he found, at the press conference for his findings in 1998, Wakefield called for the use of single vaccines for each of the 3 diseases in the MMR vaccine.
Okay. And
he called for them to be distributed at the rate of 1 vaccine per year. And 9 months before that press conference, Wakefield filed a patent for a, quote, safer measles vaccine.
Oh.
A single vaccine for measles that wouldn't be taken seriously unless this triple vaccine got knocked off its pedestal.
Okay.
Gee, what's in it for him to say that this boogeyman is real, right?
Yeah, I wonder.
Oh, and the 12 kids in the study who had been presented as a routine collection of children with developmental disorders who also happened to have digestive problems that needed treatment.
Mm-hmm.
And strangely enough, several of the parents blamed the MMR vaccine. That was, like, presented as it was all like, oh, these kids came to me because they had digestive problems, but they also had these developmental disorders, and their parents thought it had to do with this vaccine, so I started studying it. That was all a lie.
Oh. Was it now?
Those kids were brought in strategically through MMR campaign groups, and most of the parents were clients or had some other form of connection with Richard Barr, the attorney who had hired Wakefield to begin with.
Easy to find people close to you.
Mm-hmm. Interestingly enough, none of the 12 lived in London, which is where they were being treated, and one of them was even flown in from the United States.
Wow.
Yeah.
Not so close to you, I guess.
No. So all of the patients' records noted some form of compensation for the families going to be treated by Wakefield, because he was operating under a grant as well, which is just so fucked up. It's so fucked up.
Mm-hmm.
And though Wakefield said only 8 of the families blamed MMR, Deere found out that all 12 of the families blamed MMR, because they were specifically looking for an attorney, because they thought this vaccine had screwed up their toddlers. So all 12 of the parents to children aged 2.5 to 9.5 were like, MMR did this to my kid! Because there was not a lot of understanding, and because autism starts to make itself known around the same time that kids get these vaccines.
Makes sense, yeah.
They just automatically assumed that it must have been these vaccines, and then this attorney was like, $!
Yeah, I can get this.
And so the attorney was like, I'm gonna hire a doctor and send these people to this doctor so that this doctor can prove this so I can sue and make lots of money.
Mm-hmm.
And then the families are thinking they're gonna get compensation for their kids being screwed up by this vaccine.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So Deere exposes this information in 2004, and it led to 10 of the 13 co-authors on the original study to formally retract its interpretation.
Wow.
Retract its interpretation. Yeah. And they all stated that the paper established no causal link between the MMR vaccine and autism.
Wow, so this paper's already been...
Yes. In 2004, it's already been like...
But the fire was already lit.
Yeah. And then between 2007 and 2010, the UK's General Medical Council saw the longest ever professional misconduct hearing, which found that the hospital in which Wakefield conducted the study did not find anything to implicate MMR. So, like, when the pathology department was doing, like, blood tests or, like, doing the biopsy tests and stuff, they didn't find any of that, and Wakefield lied about it. Like, he just fucking faked all the test results. So what I found was, quote, Wakefield had actually consistently changed, misreported, or misrepresented the histories, diagnoses, and descriptions of the children in the study. It was all just a lie. One big elaborate lie. And the records of the children showed that some were cause for concern in terms of autism before even being vaccinated with MMR. So, like, their doctors were like, we're thinking this kid might be on the spectrum.
Sure.
Got the MMR vaccine because that's what you do.
Yeah. Regardless of whether they're on the spectrum or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then some were declared disorder-free months after the study, so they realized that they didn't have autism afterwards. And then there were some that just never had autism in their records to begin with. Like, they just weren't autistic, but they were put in this study anyway.
Wow.
Yeah. And then, on top of that, all 12 children were put through 5 days of grueling tests that included spinal taps, anesthesia, and radioactive drinks.
Holy crap.
5 days. This testing never would have cleared ethics boards in any hospital that acknowledges the Helsinki Declaration, which the Royal Free Hospital did.
Okay.
And Wakefield lied to the Lancet and claimed that the Royal Free Ethics Board had cleared the tests for the study, but the hospital's board didn't even know the truth about the study and the tests were being conducted and didn't give approval.
So, hearing all of this...
So, like, ethics violations galore.
I gotta know what's happened to this guy.
I'm getting there.
Okay.
I promise.
Okay.
I'm getting there. In 2010, the Lancet retracted the entire study. They just went, never mind, this study is bad, it's bogus. We published it, it's not good. Like, ignore this study.
Man, I hope this guy gets burned.
Right?
They got burned at the stake. I mean, seriously, burnt at the stake.
Yeah. So then, he didn't. The General Medical Council in the UK ordered him to be erased from the UK Doctors Registrar, which in the United States we would call that losing his license to practice medicine. Mm-hmm, so he lost his medical license in the UK. Can't be a doctor anymore.
Sure.
damn straight this asshole can't be a doctor anymore. He straight up fucking tortured 12 children for 5 days and then made up bogus results so that he could scare the whole world into thinking that vaccines that save lives caused autism.
Sure, he tortured 5 children, but
no,
think
12
of
children.
12 children, but think of the number of people that are affected from this now.
The thousands of people in Europe who are dying from measles.
Right. That's his fault. That's on him.
Yeah. Like, over 500 people were, like, infected with measles in Disneyland, and most of them were either infants too small to get the vaccine, or people who were allergic.
You know what? I hope... I take that back. I don't want him burnt at the stake.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's too sweet.
Yeah.
That's too nice for him. He needs to be put in a padded cell with screens on the ceiling and on the floor that he can't get through, that shows the damage constantly for the rest of his life. I mean, that he is a horrible, evil human being.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. He lost his license to practice medicine. He went on to work for, like, essentially anti-vax organizations. And he says that all of this is a lie. Like, that it's all basically the government trying to bring him down, and, like, the pharmaceutical companies trying to bring him down because he was like, no, look, this is, like, destroying children's lives. This is poisoning their brains.
Yeah.
So he says that, like, this journalist was essentially fed this story by the government, the UK government.
Okay.
So that he could release it and debunk the study, but the study was accurate. But the government and the pharmaceutical companies are all in collusion together to try to hide these facts. Except, like, there are so many other independent studies that have debunked this. Like, there are so many studies that find absolutely no link whatsoever between MMR.
Did those studies, did they torture children, though?
No, they didn't.
Oh, well, then of course they didn't find it.
They were all ethically funded.
That's the problem. That's the problem.
Yeah. So we've got this completely debunked. But the anti-vax community is still, like, very alive and very well.
You know, and the thing is it sounds like you have to live off of a conspiracy.
Well, but what's crazy is, like, you don't have to live off the conspiracy because the anti-vax movement is also evolving with the science. So they're like, okay, maybe it doesn't cause autism, but they're moving the goalposts. Like, like, most people who... Okay. There's a statistic. It's in here somewhere. Oh, peer research. 1 in 10 Americans did not believe that the MMR vaccine is safe for healthy children. 1 in 10. 1 in 10. 10%.
Well, that's the 10% that's...
10% of Americans don't believe it's safe. A further 7% answered that they did not know if the vaccine was safe. They just didn't know.
It's one thing to not know. You're not a doctor.
I'm not a scientist. I don't know.
But if
I trust the scientists.
If you have a doctor telling you that this is safe, that they've done the research. That's the thing. I trust that if a doctor is going to put something in me, they may not have done that research yesterday, but I'm sure they did it when they were in school.
Yeah.
They read about this stuff. I'm sure they shadowed somebody.
Sure.
Like, and then if they're going to put something in me or my children, I have to trust that they did it. If they don't have...
that's exactly where I'm getting at, though. These people don't trust that. That's what we're saying. It's like, so I said they moved the goalposts. When you ask those 10% of people why they don't think vaccines are safe, almost none of them will say something about autism. Almost none of them. They'll say things like, oh, well, there's a lot of, like, I know you hate this, but there's, like, chemicals in there we don't know about. Corey's big thing is he hates when people bitch about chemicals because everything's a fucking chemical. So, So they'll say, like, oh, you know, they're still poisoning our kids because they're putting all sorts of things in these vaccines, and there's all these chemicals we don't know about, and none of it's declared, and, like, we don't know every ingredient that's in there because it's not necessary because there's such trace amounts of certain things.
Sure.
They only really tell us what, you know, like, the big things as far as being allergic to it, because, like, oh, some kids can't have this because they're allergic to eggs, right?
Sure.
That kind of thing. So... all they've done is move the goalposts.
Okay.
They've gone from vaccines cause autism, which in what world should that be worse than polio and the measles and the mumps and rubella? Like, in what world is that worse? Apparently, in this strange 10% world we live in, that's worse. Okay. But that got debunked, so they moved the goalpost and they said, oh, well, it's just poisoning our kids. They give our kids too many too fast, and it's compromising their immune systems because they're giving these children live viruses. Okay. Which, that is, like, a much better argument than it causes autism. Like, it's a much better argument to say they load up live viruses and they give our children 36 of these in, like, a 2-year span. What is that doing to their bodies? That's I can understand fair question.
That's a, yeah, okay.
But it began at, like, the hysteria around vaccines began in 1998 with this bullshit study linking vaccines to autism. And there are still people who absolutely believe that. There are still people who believe that. Most of the reputable autism societies, like the groups that raise money and are trying to find out what actually causes autism and, like, how we can help these people, will, like, if you go to those websites, they're like, no, vaccines don't cause this.
That's good.
So like that overall has been debunked. The vaccines cause autism thing. Most people don't still believe that.
Yeah.
Some people will cite it. Our president, for one, says that vaccines cause autism because he's an idiot.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
And he knows, because he knows all the best scientists.
He knows all the best ones.
All of them. So, but there's a weird, crazy contingency of the population who still believes this. There's a much bigger contingency of the population who has gone on to say, maybe not autism, but what is it doing? It can't be good, essentially.
I just, you know, I just wonder what this would sound like in the 1930s.
When people were actually living with polio.
Yeah.
Like, if you could tell somebody in the 1930s, we can get rid of polio. You will never have to worry about your child living with polio.
But there's a small chance they might.
There's a small chance this will overwhelm their immune system.
Yeah.
Or there's a small chance that your next door neighbor thinks this is going to overwhelm their child's immune system, and their child's going to contract something nasty and kill your kid.
So let's say there is this small chance that it causes autism. I really wonder what the public view would be in the 1930s. Do you risk it? Do you say, I would rather have my child, like, have a chance at, you know, a potential
semi-normal life, at least,
you know, semi-normal life, you know, especially if they're on the low end of the spectrum, or a chance at polio, you know,
like something that could absolutely kill them, a chance at measles, a chance at mumps, a chance at
all that stuff,
fucking smallpox, you know what I mean? Like, something that is known to kill people. So when the US still experienced measles, where is it? We had 250,000 cases a year and around 500 deaths every single year with the measles.
Sure.
We all but eradicated that until the anti-vax movement came up.
Yeah.
What? And that's where I get into how this conspiracy, though the autism part of it has been obviously debunked, is still so harmful because it's still alive and well. There are currently 18 states that allow for non-medical exemptions to vaccines.
Okay.
And 12 of them, the number of philosophical non-medical rejections has risen since 2009.
Okay.
Because of these exemptions, hotspots of non-vaccinated children are cropping up. Actually, Ashland, Oregon is one of the biggest ones. Which I found very interesting and also makes very sense. Ashland's a very crunchy granola...
That makes a lot of sense.
Hippie kind of place, so that makes a lot of sense. But the hotspots are becoming breeding grounds for previously all but eradicated diseases like measles.
Sure.
Measles outbreaks are becoming more common, and it's deadly. Like, measles is deadly. It's not a joke. It's no, like, small thing. And we depend on children to be vaccinated on time in order to keep the herd immunity strong. So this is something a lot of people argue about, like, well, if we've eradicated it, how come we have to vaccinate people? And it's the herd immunity. Because we've already talked about, you have infants that are too young to get the vaccine.
Sure. You
have people with compromised immune systems, autoimmune diseases, they have cancer, who cannot get the vaccine because their immune systems cannot handle having a live virus injected in them. And then you have people who are allergic to something in the vaccine who can't have the vaccine. So you have this very small, very limited number of people who aren't being vaccinated, and they depend on everyone around them to get the vaccine, so it just can't, like, that disease can't live.
Absolutely.
But if enough people around them in these hot spots don't get the vaccine, and then one of them goes to fucking Disneyland, picks up measles because somebody else from another hotspot came there, and then that person gets on a plane with a woman with a 6-week-old baby,
and next thing you know,
gives that baby measles, and then goes home to this hotspot of people who weren't fucking vaccinated, and gives it to all these other unvaccinated children, and then the babies in the town all get measles, and babies can't fucking fight measles off. Are you kidding me? They're tiny and, like, have no immune systems. That's why they don't get vaccines that early. Jesus.
Yeah.
Like, you were literally bringing back an epidemic type of virus that we thought was gone. And it's measles now, but what's fucking next?
Right. The Black Plague.
Jesus. And that is where my passion came in. Whew.
Yeah, that was quite the rant. I had to sit back for that one.
I apologize, except I don't. Because fuck this shit. Like, you spelled it out when you were like, if you are so selfish that you care about your one child, possibly, like, tiny millisecond think that child might get something like autism or might have a compromised immune system due to the one vaccine, tiny, microscopic iota of a chance, but you don't care if the children and the people with compromised immune systems around you could possibly die.
Yeah. Because
of your minuscule iota of a chance. Fuck that.
You're selfish.
Yeah.
Absolutely selfish. That's what it is.
Yep.
And, I get it. People care.
No,
people absolutely care. There are people in my life that I care about, and...
Yeah, there are people in my life I care about too, but it's that greater good principle.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is.
I mean, how would you feel if you single-handedly, like, wiped out all of the babies in your neighborhood?
Right.
Because you didn't want to vaccinate your kid because there was the smidgen of a chance your kid was going to be autistic.
Don't worry, little Jimmy. You're more important than all of the population of Chicago under 5.
Right? Yeah.
Because that is a...
Because I don't want you to have a developmental disability.
Yep. Don't worry. You still might have autism, though.
Because that has nothing to do with it, right? Yeah. So I have one closing thing to say, and it's a quote from pediatrician Paul Offit.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that you, in particular, would really appreciate this quote.
Okay.
He says, quote, and he's talking about the fact that we've debunked.
Okay.
That we've debunked this. Science is there. Quote, whether the public is hearing the scientific community's answer is another matter. It's not hard to scare people, but it's extremely difficult to unscare them.
Yeah. It's hard to educate people.
Yeah.
It is.
There you have it.
Guys, I'm pretty sure we have the truth on this one.
Yeah, I found it. It's here.
I think we have the truth on this one.
Yeah. You can stop looking.
Whether you agree with us or not.
You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at TTAS Podcast. If you are a fan of the podcast, you like what we're doing here, you can jump on over to iTunes and leave us a good review. It helps people find us. It really does. And you can also jump over to our Patreon, also at TTAS Podcast, and see videos, and you can get extra merch that's exclusive to Patreon. Mm-hmm. And then you help this podcast become better by doing that. And then You can find merch at thetruthissomewhere.threadless.com. You can find our show notes and anything important over at thetruthissomewhere.com. And if you have questions, comments, concerns, you can email us at thetruthissomewherepodcast@gmail.com. Signing
Excellent.
off.
Thanks, guys.